creatively with the Bible. We can use them to write out a paraphrase of the passage. I've done that. That was one of the tasks that we had earlier in our studies. Or we can write a letter to a friend on the basis of what we learned from the Bible. We can draw a picture that captures the essence of a passage, or write a poem or music that is inspired by this text. This is journaling in aid of the creative process. And so the session overview for today, we want to explore a new way to do Bible study based on a journaling perspective. The idea is simple. What do we see when we read through various incidents from one person's life? How can we retell the story in journal format? This will probably be a new way for you to study the Bible. And then in talking about our stories, so we've all had the experience of marriage here, and it was interesting for me to look back on how my marriage came to be and to see some parallels with Ruth and Boaz. I found that interesting. So I reflected on it. The questions that are here say, first, describe how you met the person who is or was to become, might have become, you might like to become your spouse. In our case, became. My story is that we were brought together by a mutual friend. This is kind of an interesting thing. I think of that song from Fiddler on the Roof, matchmaker, matchmaker, bring me a match. And it's kind of an interesting thing because I would never have dreamed seriously when I was in the Air Force at the time, and I was a staff sergeant, and I was a evening supervisor, the graveyard supervisor of the passenger service in an Air Force hangar, basically a terminal. And my friend was the night supervisor for the air freight. So we coordinated a lot when we had aircraft coming in that had both passengers. Most of them had either passengers or freight, but sometimes they were dual use, and we would work together on those types of things. So anyway, and it says, where did you meet your spouse? Interestingly enough, in a bar. What happened was we had a favorite bar that the airmen from the airbase, Patrick Air Force Base, went to in Satellite Beach. It was called the A-Frame, and it was a sort of a billiards pool bar, and a lot of guys hung out there after work and things like that. And so my friend Arnie set us up, and it just so happened, how interesting is this? Arnie was my then friend's ex-boyfriend, so that was kind of interesting. And so he was in a position to really know very well, to know Diane and me, because we had worked together for a year and a half or so at the base, and I had just gone through, sadly, a pretty rough divorce, and it was a tough moment for me. And the way I looked at it, and we felt this mutually throughout our married life. We basically, in a way, saved each other. And it's not that we saved each other. The Lord saved us with each other. It was an interesting thing because I had kind of drifted away from my faith life at that time. And I gradually, as we got to know each other, I started getting reconnected with my faith life. There was a local Lutheran church in the community where we were there, where I worked. We hadn't yet been married. But we started going to that church. And so we were married, and then Diane went through confirmation. She was a Baptist. And I went through with her. It was a really great experience. But it's neat because our coming together at a very difficult time for each of us, worked out to be one of the best things that could have happened to us at that time. And going forward, it's been the same as far as I'm concerned. And it asked what was the best thing about your courtship. One, in my case, I'm madly in love. I'm a romantic in certain ways. And she as well. We were madly in love. What was the downside? Her dad didn't like me at all. And that was interesting. It was kind of like a fungus. He grew on me. And it turned out after we were married, he understood that I was okay. He was afraid for his daughter that I was on the rebound, and that would be it. I would use her and take off. No, no, that's not me. Um, so anyhow, that's my story. Either of you want to share any of your stories, or about how you met, or I understand you were what in elementary school? Were you in the same school or same class? Oh, okay. Uh huh. Wow. Sure. Sure. That's okay. It's being recorded anyway, so we're not worried about her. Yeah. Thank you. That's okay. I, oh, that's funny. Yeah, our lives are an open book, but yeah, she can turn us down. Look for the switch and let us know if you find it. If you don't find it, especially. Amazing. Uh huh. That's interesting. Yeah. Right. Sure. Fantastic. Sure. Sure. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. That's that is a cool story. I'm glad to hear that. And it's interesting. A lot of the young love doesn't always work out. Yours has worked out beautifully. It's really been a wonderful, wonderful story. Oh yeah. I imagine all people that know each other for a long, long time, like you do, definitely. Yeah, it's not all going to be good. That's cool. Very good. Very good. Um, any best things or worst things that happened during your courtship, or yeah, no problem. Yeah, I do. Of course, of course, of course. I'll let Gary tell his story too, and then I'll have a comment because my brother-in-law and I have known each other since for a long time, long before he married my sister. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Oh, cool. Uh huh. Sure. Sure. Getting used to work together. That's kind of neat. You get to know each other. You know the strong points, the weak points. You know each other pretty well. Yeah, yeah. Good. Sure, sure. How did the family feel about that? That's great. Hmm. Glad to hear it. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, very good, very good. So how long have you folks been married? 22. How about you, Don? 52. Fantastic. And we're at 49 ourselves, so that's kind of cool. Yeah, very good. Um, yeah, trying to blend two lives that are very different for the most part, except you had a lot in common. You had a ton of stuff in common. Um, we had a lot of differences. You probably, although because you shared the same career, you had a lot of commonalities too. Exactly. Very good. Well, it's very interesting. What I was going to say, my brother-in-law has a similar story to yours. He first proposed to his future wife, my sister, in fifth grade. they sat they sat one behind the other, and I think it was Von Seal that turned around. Barry had something to say to her, and he says to her, "I'm going to marry you." And boy, my sister doesn't take that well. She, no way are you going to marry me. And the funny thing about that theme is that it followed them all the way through her college. Speaking of college, in fact, he proposed to her several times, seriously, after high school and during her college. He was in the military, and he did 2 tours of Vietnam in the heat of Vietnam. He was a combat platoon commander, and thank goodness and thank God he survived. But he had a lot of rough moments over there, and so he came back after his first deployment, asked her again. She was still in college. She said, "Nope, not going to even talk to you until I get out of college." And he tried to put the pressure on her. So during that time that he was not back in Vietnam, he came to our house to take her on a date. She refused to see him. She stayed in her room. Guess who went on the date? I did. I stood in for my sister. We went to Expo 67 in Montreal. We lived about 40 miles south of Montreal at that time, and we did the things that a young man and young woman would do. I played the role of my sister, and he won a lot of teddy bears for me. We won one big teddy bear too, but he won a lot of things at the games that you would play in these places. And, and then we came home, and I brought all that stuff with me. Of course, she kind of poo-pooed it at the time. But finally, after his second deployment to Vietnam, his second year in Vietnam, she was graduating during that year, and boom, she said yes. So they got married very soon after he got back from that second deployment. Really interesting story. But they've been married about the same period of time, same length of time that you have, about 52 years or so. They were married in 68 or something like that. I'm not sure. 50, whatever that number is. Um, and that's a neat thing. I believe too, yeah. And as I see that, each one of our lives, I feel that I can discern the Lord working in our lives, in kind of putting us together with the right match. And we've been very blessed ourselves, and we feel really, really good about that. And now we're grandparents, about to be great grandparents, so that's kind of cool. Okay, now moving on, it says the journaling method. What we're looking for here, there's actually two. There's the story of Ruth, the biblical story, And then there is a journal entry by a man named Eliot, who was a missionary who was sadly um, assassinated by the people that he was trying to serve in Latin America. But anyway, the story of Ruth and Boaz, I think that's an interesting one. Now, what they asked us to do, it says each person, the journaling exercise, first take your journal and find a comfortable place to sit. Each person will select one of the following passages from the book of Ruth. Your goal is to respond in your journal to each of the 3 questions from that selection. First question is designed to help you notice and understand what the passage is saying. The second question asks you to write what Ruth or Naomi might have written in her journal. The third question suggests one possible connection between their lives and your life. So we had 6 different passages that you could select from. I'm going to go ahead and open my Bible here and just kind of look through what those passages are. And if you've had an opportunity to read them, that's great. If you haven't, we still will be glad to discuss them with you. I found the use of words in this book. This is Ruth. Joshua judges Ruth is the way I remember my books of the Bible there. And then 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, if I recall correctly. Yeah, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. In my book, it's on 424. And like I said, it's kind of sandwiched in between Judges and 1 Samuel. Okay? Now, this is interesting. For some reason, I had never taken note of the other daughter-in-law. Her name is Orpah. Ruth and Orpah are the 2 daughters-in-law of Naomi, who had married her sons, Mahlon, Mahlon, and Chilion. And it's kind of it starts out as a very sad story because Naomi is married, and she's married to a man who is an Ephrathite. I found that to be a very interesting word. There are several references in Scripture to Ephratah being the early name, the name during the time of Jacob of Bethlehem. Bethlehem Ephratah. The city, Bethlehem, is the word for the house anyway. The word Bethlehem means house. And the Ephrathah is a Hebrew word for the word fruitful. And now remember, this is Bethlehem. This is the city that eventually has David as one of its most famous births, if you will. And then we know that Jesus himself was born there in the line of David. And I just found that to be fascinating information, that this was known as first Ephrathah from the time of Jacob and then became Bethlehem. And it was known as Bethlehem Ephrathah. By the way, they mentioned it in here as the clan. That's interesting, the family. And Ephrathah, apparently there was a person named something like Ephrathah who founded. Oh, you know who it was? It's a character. I don't know him actually that well. I don't know of him. Her H-U-R, her, is the founder. I looked that up. Is the founder of Bethlehem. Okay, and her H-U-R, started the clan of Ephrathah. Got it. So anyway, we're introduced to that in the first few verses, and I noticed there was a reference. I did look up some of this information in what is called the Biblical Encyclopedia online, and there is a prophecy in Micah 5:2 to Bethlehem being the birthplace where the Savior would be born. Um, and so the husband of Naomi is Elimelech, sorry, Elimelech, Elimelech. Their two sons are Mahlon and Chilion, and they all move. They all go to Moab. Now that's an interesting and curious thing. It doesn't really explain why they went to Moab, other than maybe um, their migration could have been forced at some time because of famines were common. There were famines all the time. Every time you turn around, there's a few good years and there's a few bad years. And many people moved because of the convenience of the food source, wherever it was that they went. But nonetheless, they go to Moab, and it's in Moab that the sons meet Moabite girls and marry them. And then Elimelech dies. The sons die within a 10-year period, by the way. I thought that was kind of interesting to me, too, that they lived in that area for about 10 years. So the women had been married to their husbands for some time, but no children that I hear referenced here. So anyway, the point is, what do you do? You know, it was the custom that when a woman's husband died, that she was kind of handed back to her family. And there was either somebody in that family who was willing to marry her as the redeemer, or something to that effect, or the parents were responsible for it, depending on her age probably. The parents were responsible for her care. So Naomi says, we can't stay here. You know, we have no males. There's nobody to take care of us. So she tells her daughters-in-law, go back to your families. Well, the daughter-in-law, Orpah, agrees. She returns to her family. Ruth, however, says no. She clings to her. She hangs on to her. And she says, but Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Wow, what an act of devotion that is. Love and devotion for her mother-in-law, that she's willing to give up all that she had grown up with to go back to a strange land, a place that she had no earthly idea about, to be a stranger in that place and to be subject to whatever happens to her in that. And we find that when they go back, there's a lot that could happen to her because she's an unmarried, she's a widow. People could physically abuse her, I mean, in a way, sexually abuse her, the field hands. And part of that is because what she was doing was she was gleaning. Of course, Naomi knew Boaz and the family and all that, and knew that Boaz was a potential redeemer. So she, in a way, if you ask me, it doesn't state it directly, but it looks like Naomi becomes the manipulator in this thing. She's setting it up so that Boaz will first see her, recognize her, and possibly be willing to redeem her. And of course, Ruth goes along with that. She wants to support her mother-in-law, so she goes through the gleaning process. And when Boaz sees her, he's taken by her. She's beautiful. She's pretty. She's very attractive, and he knows about her since they had come back from Moab, and he's privileging her in a way. So he's allowing her not only to glean, but he makes sure that the guys that are harvesting leave a little extra behind for her. And so she has plenty to eat, and she takes all that home with her to Naomi, and she's able to make bread and such things out of it for them as she can. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Now, a word that I ran across in this passage is what Naomi calls herself. I think it's rather interesting because it takes us back to the Exodus. And that is, she uses the word, um, says, so the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? She said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. Do you recall what we had read in Exodus about Mara? Mara was the place on their travels that had bitter water. And God told Moses to strike it and it would make it sweet. So it's kind of an interesting thing that the way she characterizes herself as like bitter water. I found that to be very, very fascinating. It says, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. In other words, having lost her husband, having lost her two sons as well, she feels bad about it, feels very bad. And so I think it's an interesting thing there. I also will note as we go through this that there are some other things that take us back. There are references that take us back to the earlier times of the Israelites. So they returned to Bethlehem, and that's of course where Boaz lives, and Ruth becomes a gleaner, and in that way she meets Boaz, and it says, Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, this is during the harvest season, the harvest period, one of his young men, and there's a lot of references to the young men. They are the men of the family who are doing the harvesting. And the servant, this happened to be a servant, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. In other words, she's a hard worker. That's probably one of the first characteristics that Boaz notices about her. And then Boaz, having heard about her from the servant, he asked her, now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep close to my young women. My young women are safe. If you stay with my young women, you too will be safe, is what he's telling her. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? So again, between being with the young women and Boaz has charged his young men, don't touch her, don't you dare, keep her safe. That's a very important statement. He states it as a question. And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink with the young men, what the young men have drawn. And then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. So he's got the word. And how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. That's a lot of courage. That's a lot of determination on her part. And he's heard that story. And then this is an interesting term too, by the way. These words, some of them are really interesting words. It says on verse 12 of chapter 2, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. That expression, under whose wings, is associated with a husband. A wife is supposed to find protection under her husband's wings, I find that a fascinating statement because nobody said anything about marriage yet, but there it is. It's an important issue coming up here. Then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So he's giving her a privileged place during the lunch period to eat with him. And that's important. Now we learn, then she mentions that to Naomi when she finishes her harvesting for that day. And Naomi says, let's see, her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. The mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today, and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man, this is the key, the man is a close relative of ours, one, now this is interesting that she says it, one of our redeemers, plural. Well, it turns out that there are two potential redeemers here. They are allowed to act on that based on the closeness of their relationship. What's interesting, they don't tell you exactly what that relationship is, but it's interesting that Boaz is not in the first position. There is another relative who is closer in relationship to Naomi and the a daughter-in-law, who has the priority to be the redeemer, the one who marries her to keep the name of the husband, Chilion, to keep his name going, in perpetuity, if you will, by having children. So that's an interesting issue. It's an interesting problem. But just the recognizing of him as a redeemer is what gets both of their interests. So now this is an interesting thing too. Obviously, I'm not anyway, clued into all the customs that have to do with the harvest season. But once they gather the grain, they thresh it, right? So now they're in the stage of threshing. And they stay out in the field and sleep, basically, or wherever that is, the threshing floor. And that's the next step in their relationship. So Boaz goes out to the threshing floor. I'm not sure personally whether this is something that happened regularly, like the one in charge actually went out and slept with the men while they were harvesting, but it's what happens here. And then the action that Naomi suggests, or at least that Ruth, it says she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law commanded. So that she told her, Naomi told her to do this. What happens there is a garment that men wear, or at least carry with them, that they can wear as a garment, or they can wrap around themselves as a blanket to sleep outside. So Boaz has that wrap. And what he does is he wraps himself in that. And then when they have gone to sleep, this is interesting, Ruth comes in to the area where Boaz is, and she sleeps at his feet. And he wakes up in the night and realizes that she's by his feet. What that is a proposal of marriage. So she's giving him an indication by sleeping at his feet that if he would like to redeem her, she's available. That's kind of a neat thing too. Well, Boaz is a very God-fearing man, so he wouldn't do anything at all that is outside the law or the custom. So Boaz, being a good Israelite, if you want to call it that, he would yield, and he makes this statement, he would yield to the man who is the closer relative and has the greater priority to be the redeemer. But he wants to do it the right way. This is amazing. This is really a neat thing. So where does he go to give this man the opportunity to be the redeemer? He goes to the gate of the city. At the gate of the city, the rulers, if you will, the elders or whatever group runs the government, that's where they meet. And so he invites the other relative to meet with him there in the presence of those elders. And he tells them, you have the right to redeem this young lady. Do you want it? And it's interesting. I'm not quite sure how I follow all of the logic that's going on here, but there's something that happens when this offer is made to this other young man, and he ends up turning down the offer because I don't know how this works. When you redeem, what you're doing is you're taking charge of what the other person left. And that doesn't mean just a person, like the wife, but it means the land. The land goes first. The wife goes with the land. And so he gives him the opportunity to redeem that. And he sounds like, and I'm making some inferences here that may or may not be due. But it's either that the land is too expensive for him to redeem, or he doesn't want the added responsibility of the wife. But for whatever reason it is, he turns down in front of the elders. This is important because he needs them as witnesses. In front of the elders, he declines the opportunity to exercise his right to be the redeemer for Ruth. Well, that leaves it open to Boaz. It's perfect. It's the perfect setup. But then again, it's God's way, obviously, because that's what this is all about. It's doing God's will. It's governing your life according to the law, and that's what he's very apt to do. He really is. He's an observer of that law. So anyway, the other relative turns down Ruth and says, let's see. Oh, this is another interesting thing. So when she leaves that morning, before the meeting of the elders at the gate, so she lay at his feet until morning, but arose before one could recognize another. She didn't want to be seen in that circumstance, okay? And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she did. Now, this is interesting. So she has something like the same type of garment that the guys have, to wrap herself in. But what he does for her is he gives her more grain to take back to Naomi. So he's really, you can see that he favors her, and he really looks forward to this. But again, he wants to do it the right way. So he goes up to this gate, and he sits down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend. Sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down, and he took 10 men of the elders. This is interesting because there's requirements about how many witnesses and such you need. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from, this is in chapter 4, by the way, has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, the day you buy the field, this is the information you didn't have, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Now that's an interesting thing, that his taking on Ruth would impair his inheritance. I can't say it's the same exact thing, but it sure sounds a lot like Onan's problem, if you recall. Remember that the one son dies, and Onan is the second or third in line, and he's told to who was it, Judah? I can't remember. Anyway, he was told to take this woman, and he wouldn't do it. He spilled his seed, and it cost him his life. Well, here is a different way of declining that. He's simply saying it before the fact that if I do this, then I will lose my inheritance. So for that reason, he declines. Okay. Now, this was a custom in the former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. So Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife. And that's an interesting thing to see the negotiations at work in the decision of who will be the redeemer of this young widow. And so Boaz, in a way, Boaz is the winner. Now, I had mentioned that there are other words that are used that take us back to Exodus, and that take us back, in this case, in the paragraph I'm about to read, that take us back actually to, was it Isaac? Was it Isaac had Rachel and Leah? Jacob. Was it? I apologize. Anyway, Rachel and Leah, I think it was Jacob. Remember, he had to work for 7 years or something like that, and he got tricked into doing it twice. Well, anyway, I think it was Jacob's wives. Anyway, it says, here we go. It says, and also Ruth the Moabite, I have bought to be my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. Then all the people who were at the gate, now this is interesting, said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah. Isn't that interesting? In other words, it's a blessing that the elders are giving that goes way back in their history to the time of Jacob. Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. Now that's an interesting thing, because the Hebrew method of literature, a literary expression, is repetition. And we notice that since there are two names for Bethlehem, Ephrathah, the older name, and Bethlehem, the newer name, if you will, not new, but newer than Ephrathah, are repeated right here. So may you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be, listen to this, like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Very, very interesting. Remember, what was Tamar acting like when she became impregnated? She was acting like a prostitute with her own father-in-law. How interesting is that? It says, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So what I see happening here in the story of Ruth is a reconnection with the whole story of Israel. And since she's in line, her offspring, now that she's been redeemed by Boaz, She is in the line of Christ. She is an ancestor of Christ. And the child that is born to her, Obed, by Boaz, Obed is the grandfather of David. We have Obed. Obed's son is Jesse. Jesse's son is David. So this is in the immediate, like the grandfather role of the king, one of the greatest kings of Israel, King David. So that is all very fascinating stuff. And then it ends. This is interesting too. The book of Ruth, very short as it is, it ends with the genealogy of David. And the last few verses 18 through 22, say, now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. Very, very interesting, connecting the genealogies as it is there. So, story Ruth, it's a very fascinating story, and just wondering if you had read this before. Did you have any comments? Did you select any of these sets of questions to respond to? Either of you? There's 6 sets of questions. I responded to number 3. I'll be happy to share. Let me take out my journal entry. I have a hard time getting into the head of women. When it said, because one of the instructions for this was to, well, how would Ruth have journaled about this? I don't know. Far be it from me. But I did write something, so I'll share it with you. Here it goes. Ruth and Boaz, I called this, I call all my journal entries my take, and this one I call Ruth and Boaz and Diane and Dan. Bob and Carol, Ted and Alice, I don't know if you remember, there was a movie titled that, so I grabbed that title and did it for myself. All right, Ruth and Boaz and Diane and Dan. The meeting of Ruth and Boaz. Ruth was a loving and devoted daughter-in-law to Naomi. When Naomi tells Ruth to return to her parents after the death of her husband, Naomi's son, she says, do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. She didn't think twice about traveling to a foreign country to live among strangers. When we meet Boaz, we see the perfect match for Ruth, a man who was nearly related to Ruth's deceased husband, so that he qualified as a redeemer, eligible to marry her in her late husband's place. He is kind and generous to her beyond what custom required. In fact, there was another male relative who was 1 degree closer to Ruth and had priority over Boaz. He offered that man first claim as redeemer, but he turned her down. This left Boaz the option he desired, so he was able to marry Ruth without hindrance. Throughout the time it took to settle the requirements of the law, Boaz protected Ruth from abuse by the field hands and provided her, through the gleaning process, adequate food for both Ruth and Naomi. I would call him a perfect gentleman and partner in marriage for Ruth. Ruth might have commented in her journal that she hoped Boaz would accept her offer to marry, but she would follow God's choice for her. She might comment on how she trusted the Lord would do the right thing for her and Naomi. In other words, when she declared to Naomi, your God will be my God, she takes this seriously, and she makes Naomi's God her God and shows him the deference and gives him the control of her life. Now, so that's the first 2 out of 3. Then I said, in my case, Arnie was my friend and fellow shift supervisor at the hangar where we worked in the Air Force. I supervised the air passenger crew, and he supervised the air freight crew on the graveyard shift. Arnie was a good friend and matchmaker who showed a deep understanding of me and Diane, though from different perspectives. I had gone through a difficult divorce, and I felt that she and I saved each other at a difficult time in each of our lives. Or, as better said, God saved us at a difficult time in our lives. And so that was my response to number 3. As you think about it, was there anything in the story, as you heard it even just now, that jumps out at you? Is there anything that you see there that you could respond to in any of these ways? Or in the same way, whichever. Any ideas? It's not important that you respond. I just want to know if you had anything to say. Yeah. hmm I agree. You know, the thing I think that's most important for us to take away from that, thanks a lot for your comment, what I think is the most important to take is that God is at work in our lives, you know? And I have felt that pretty much since I was baptized. I've always felt that God is a player in my life, you know, that he directs what the outcome. You know, I'm always drawn to that passage in Scripture that says, man makes his plans, God guides his steps. And I think that's really, you know, that's been important in my life. How about you, Gary?
Well, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
The points that God has put in like in our case too. My wife and I, you know, Denise had not been. Her parents were, her mother on her side of the family were devout Catholic, but they, well, they weren't so devout. They didn't really go to church.
Sure, sure.
But from an Irish Catholic background.
Mm-hmm.
So Denise herself was not really a, you know, a church person, you might say. She had been baptized.
Mm-hmm.
And at a Catholic church. So she was, you know, sort of, and she did a little bit of that too, like making, you know, taking on, you know, my religion and my,
Sure.
you know, religious background.
Sure.
And yet at the same time, there were characteristics or things about her that were things that I would have really been looking for originally too.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I had been married before that too. The religious
Yeah.
things didn't work.
Yeah.
It didn't. Those elements weren't there.
Sure.
But they were in hers.
Yeah.
Kind of like say God's plan. You know.
Yeah.
Interesting. Always brings that together.
Absolutely. You know, once we realize this, I don't know how to characterize it. I hope maybe it's an aspect of maturity. I just wish more people had the opportunity to recognize God working in their lives. I think it would mean a lot more to them. It would be not just a comfort to them, which I think it would be, but it would be a way to channel their energies. What is said here is said to us, and it offers us not just historical insight, not just literary insight, not just any normal thing. This is a divine book. It has power that goes beyond the text. And I find that to be very, very interesting. The deeper I get into it, the more I realize, hey, there's something working here that goes beyond anything I could even begin to come up with. And it puts me in my right position in relationship to God. And I really appreciate that opportunity. Well, I thank you, gentlemen, for being with me on this journey. This is the last session for the spiritual journaling. It's at least by this book. I personally would like to continue it. What I'm trying to think of right now is a way to do that, maybe incorporating the journaling idea more directly in our walk through the Bible, our study, through the Bible that we're carrying out on our Monday evenings. Um, and I've noticed that, we can talk about this after the session. Um, I would like to have your input on what you think about either continuing this, discontinuing this, or continuing this in some other way. So with that having been said, let's close with the Lord's Prayer, and then I'm going to go turn the machine off here. Okay. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you, gentlemen. This ends our session 8.